They were the picture of newlywed bliss, smiling in Paris cafes, kissing under the Eiffel Tower. But 1 week later, their bodies were found inside a dark, empty stadium in the US, blood pooling beneath the VIP seats. The honeymoon photos told one story, but the truth was far darker. Because behind the romance was a dangerous affair with a woman who had once run drugs for a violent gang. And she wasn't here to reminisce, she was here to collect on a promise Kendrick Lewis never kept. This is True Crime's Altar, where every sin is punished, every betrayal has a cost, and every soul must answer to the truth. Like, comment, and subscribe, because these are the stories the guilty prayed would stay buried. Blood never lies. It either carries love or it carries danger. On a quiet Monday night in the middle of summer, the massive stadium downtown was supposed to be empty. The last event had ended hours ago, the lights were out, and the echo of footsteps from the cleaning crew faded in the dark. But somewhere deep in the VIP section, two security officers stopped cold. Their flashlights swept over the seats until both beams froze on the same site, a young couple slumped together, motionless. A thin trail of blood ran down the steps, soaking into the carpet below. Kendrick and Naomi Lewis, just married, tarred still wearing their wedding rings. Their honeymoon photos had lit up social media only a week earlier. Now their bodies sat in silence, their faces pale under the weak beam of security lights. Within minutes, the place was swarming. Police tape across every entrance, crime scene techs snapping photos, detectives whispering as if the walls themselves could overhear. No forced entry, no robbery, nothing stolen except 2 lives. And whoever did it knew exactly where to find them. News broke before sunrise. TV anchors stood in front of the stadium's glowing gates, rain slicking their jackets, voices low and urgent. The honeymoon murders, they called it, the kind of tragedy that makes strangers cry over people they never knew. But the truth behind those seats was older than their wedding. It started years before Naomi ever put on a white dress. Kendrick Lewis was the kind of man people noticed, not just because he was tall, handsome, and quick to flash a smile, but because he moved like someone who knew exactly where he was going. Born and raised in a rough neighborhood on the South Side, he learned early how to adapt, how to read a room, and how to make people believe what he wanted them to. In his 20s, he worked his way out of the streets, or so he told everyone. Suits replaced hoodies, business trips replaced back alley meetings, and he started rubbing shoulders with people who didn't know anything about where he came from. Naomi believed in that version of him. She was drawn to his ambition, the way he seemed to have plans for everything. They met at a charity gala she attended for work. She was on the event planning team, he was there as a donor's guest. One dance, one exchange of numbers, and they were inseparable. Friends said Naomi was glowing from the day they met. She believed she had found her forever. 2 years later, they married under a white canopy by the lake, the kind of wedding that makes people believe in love again. A week later, they were walking along the Seine in Paris, wine glasses clinking in sidewalk cafes, Naomi's laughter spilling into the warm night air. Her phone filled with photos, Eiffel Tower sunsets, cobblestone streets, quiet kisses in the back of a taxi. But under it all, small cracks were forming. One night in Paris, Naomi came out of the hotel bathroom and caught Kendrick on the phone. His back was to her, his voice low but sharp. She caught only fragments. "I told you not to call. You can't show up here." "I said I'll handle it." When she asked, he smiled too easily and said it was a business associate back in the States. Naomi wanted to believe him, but the way he slipped the phone into his pocket before she could see the screen lodged in her mind like a splinter. What Naomi didn't know was that Kendrick had a history he never told her about. Years earlier, before the suits and the galas, there was Simone. She wasn't just a fling. Simone had been deep in the streets, running with a crew that moved weight and made enemies without blinking. She'd seen blood up close, knew the price of loyalty, and demanded it from anyone who claimed to love her. Kendrick had been that man once. He swore to her that one day they'd leave that life together, start fresh somewhere no one knew their names. He promised to marry her. But promises made in the dark are easy to break in daylight. When Kendrick got his shot at a clean life, he took it and left Simone behind with nothing but enemies and memories. For years, she disappeared from his world. Until Paris. Kendrick didn't see her there, not yet, but she saw him. She saw Naomi on his arm. She saw the wedding ring, and every promise he broke came back like a blade pressed to her throat. By the time Kendrick and Naomi landed back in the US, Simone already had a plan. She didn't need to guess where to find him. She knew his patterns, the places he went when he wanted privacy, and she knew that sooner or later he would meet her, whether he wanted to or not. That's the thing about the past. You can bury it, cover it with silk sheets and candlelit dinners, but it doesn't stay dead. Not when you owe it something. And Kendrick owed Simone everything. He just didn't know she'd come to collect in blood. Kendrick had been back in the States for less than a week when the first message came through. No greeting, no name, just 5 words that stopped him cold. We need to talk. Now. He knew the number before he even read it twice. Simone. The last time he'd seen her, she was standing in the doorway of a run-down apartment, eyes cold, arms crossed, telling him he was making the biggest mistake of his life. He had walked away then, certain he'd never hear her voice again. But her message felt like a hand reaching out from a grave he thought he'd buried deep. He deleted it without replying, slipped his phone into his pocket, and told himself it was nothing. But that night, he couldn't sleep. He lay next to Naomi, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word he'd ever said to Simone. By morning, there was another message. You think I won't? A photo followed, a shot of Naomi at the airport, her back to the camera, her hand in Kendrick's. He felt his chest tighten. She wasn't just reaching out now. She was close. He slipped out of bed, pacing the kitchen, fighting the urge to call her. The third message ended the fight. You made a promise. You broke it. I'm not here to be ignored. When Kendrick finally met her, it was in a coffee shop across town. She looked different, more polished, her hair pulled back, a tailored coat over her shoulders, but the sharpness in her eyes hadn't dulled. She smiled when she saw him, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile you give someone you've already decided to hurt. He sat down, keeping his voice low, telling her she had no right to show up like this. She leaned in and whispered, You told me I was your future. You swore we'd get out together. Then you disappear, and now I'm supposed to watch you give my life to her? You think I came here to cry over you? No, baby. I came here because you're going to fix this. You're going to make good on what you promised. He knew what she meant without her saying it. Marry her, bring her into his new life, give her a way out before her past caught up to her. He shook his head, told her he couldn't, but she just tapped the table. If I go down, you go down. You remember what we did. I still have proof. She left before he could answer, her perfume hanging in the air like a warning. That night at home, Naomi asked him why he seemed distracted. He smiled and kissed her forehead, told her work was stressing him out. But as he lay awake again, he knew it wasn't work keeping him up. It was Simone, and she wasn't going away. Naomi had been watching him for weeks now, quietly taking note of every late-night drive, every phone call he took in the other room, every time he came home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. She didn't press him at first. She told herself it was her imagination, that maybe the adjustment back from their honeymoon was just stressful. She tried to blame the tension on jet lag, the stack of work emails he claimed he was buried under, even the rainy weather that had been hanging over the city since they came home. But deep down she knew. You don't love someone as fiercely as she loved Kendrick without feeling the shift when something else creeps in. It was there in the way his eyes darted when she asked simple questions. It was there in the way his phone never left his pocket anymore, even when he showered. It was there in the quiet spaces between them that used to feel warm but now felt like locked doors. The night she decided to follow him, the air was thick with the kind of storm that swallows whole cities. Rain pelted the streets in hard, stinging sheets, drowning the glow of traffic lights until they looked like bleeding stars in the fog. Kendrick stood in the doorway, pulling on his coat. Client meeting, he said casually, leaning in to kiss her cheek, but his eyes didn't meet hers for more than a second. She nodded, forcing a smile, and watched him walk out into the rain. She counted to 60 in her head, every number sharpening the edge of the decision she'd been avoiding. Then she grabbed her own jacket, keys, and slipped out the door. She kept 2 cars back, headlights low, letting the storm mask her presence. Her hands were tight around the wheel, the windshield wipers slashing back and forth in frantic rhythm. Kendrick drove with purpose, not the slow, meandering pace of someone running errands. She watched his brake lights flare red as he turned into the parking lot of the old stadium downtown, the kind of place that had seen its glory decades ago. It was dark except for a few weak security lamps that cast pale circles on the wet pavement. There was no game tonight, no concert, nothing that should have brought him here. Naomi pulled into the shadows behind a service truck, cutting the engine. She watched him step out of the car, shoulders hunched against the rain, and head toward a side entrance with the kind of ease that told her this wasn't his first time here. She waited until he disappeared inside before opening her door, the cold rain soaking her hair in seconds. Her shoes made no sound as she crossed the lot, slipping through the same metal door just before it clicked shut. Inside, the air was heavy and stale, smelling faintly of steel, damp concrete, and old beer. The only sounds were the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the soft drip of water echoing through the hallways. Naomi moved cautiously, keeping her footsteps close to the wall, her breath slow and shallow. Ahead, she caught the sound of voices, low, muffled, one of them Kendrick's. She followed the sound until it led her to a private suite. The door cracked just enough for her to see. Kendrick sat at a table, his shoulders tight, and across from him was a woman Naomi had never seen before. Elegant, composed, but with eyes that burned even in the dim light. Simone. She leaned back in her chair, legs crossed, a glass of whiskey in her hand, speaking like she owned the place. Naomi couldn't hear every word, but she caught enough to make her stomach turn. Simone wasn't just talking about money. She was talking about promises, about a life Kendrick owed her, about the things they'd done together that could ruin them both if they came out. Naomi pressed her back to the wall, her hands trembling. She wanted to burst in, to demand answers, but she was rooted there, listening to Simone's voice curl around Kendrick's like smoke. Then she saw it, a gun placed carefully on the table between them, not pointed, not threatening yet, but there like an unspoken promise. Kendrick's voice was low, almost pleading, but Simone shook her head slowly, smiling in a way that made Naomi's blood run cold. She leaned forward, whispering something that made Kendrick's eyes widen. That was when Simone's gaze flicked past him and landed on the crack in the door. Naomi didn't move fast enough. The door swung open, and suddenly Naomi was inside, the stale air heavy around her, Simone's smirk cutting through the space like a blade. "So this is the wife," Simone said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. Naomi's breath caught, but she didn't look away. She turned to Kendrick, searching his face for some denial, some explanation. But he said nothing. And in that silence, Naomi understood everything. Simone stood circling them slowly, the gun now in her hand. She told Naomi she should thank her, that she was giving her the truth before taking back what was hers. Kendrick moved as if to stand, but Simone pressed the gun against his shoulder, her voice low and dangerous. "You're not leaving until I decide how this ends." The rain outside pounded harder, thunder rolling through the empty stadium. But inside, the air was still heavy, waiting for the first crack of something far deadlier than the storm. Simone's eyes were locked on Kendrick, but every so often they cut toward Naomi with a slow, deliberate cruelty, like she was measuring how much pain she could cause before pulling the trigger. She moved around the table in a slow circle, her heels clicking on the concrete floor, the sound echoing in the empty stadium suite. Kendrick kept his hands raised slightly, palms out, talking low, trying to calm her, but his voice had a crack in it Naomi had never heard before. Simone stopped behind his chair, resting the barrel of the gun lightly against the back of his neck. "You had your chance," she said softly, almost like she was telling a secret. "All those nights you told me I was your escape, all those times you swore you'd take me with you when you left. I held on to that, Kendrick. I turned down every other man, every other deal because you told me I was the one. And then one day you're just gone. No goodbye. No explanation. And now I see you on the news, married to her." She gestured at Naomi without even looking. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest, every muscle in her body tight, but her voice came out steady. "You think killing us will fix your life?" Simone laughed, a sharp sound that bounced off the walls. "Fix my life? No, baby girl. It won't fix anything, but it'll make me feel a hell of a lot better." She stepped away from Kendrick, moving toward the window that overlooked the empty field below, rain streaking the glass. Do you know what it's like to live with a death sentence over your head every day? To owe people you can't pay? To know that every time you close your eyes might be the last? Her voice rose as she turned back to face them. He was my way out, my safety, my future, and he threw me to the wolves. Kendrick tried to stand, but Simone lifted the gun again, this time pointing it at Naomi. Sit down, or she's the first to go. Naomi froze, staring into the black circle at the end of the barrel, her breath shallow. Kendrick lowered himself back into the chair slowly, his eyes locked on Simone's. What do you want from me? He asked. Simone's smile was thin, almost sad. The same thing you promised me years ago. You walk out of here with me tonight. You cut her loose, you forget you were ever married, and we disappear together. Or, she tilted her head, pressing the gun tighter against Naomi's temple. Or you both die right here, and I walk out alone. The silence in the room was suffocating. The sound of the rain outside felt louder, heavier, like the storm itself was pressing against the glass. Naomi looked at Kendrick, waiting for him to speak, to tell Simone he'd never choose her over his wife. But the words didn't come fast enough. Simone cocked the gun, her finger resting on the trigger, and for the first time, Naomi saw in Kendrick's eyes the flicker of a man who was cornered enough to consider the unthinkable. Kendrick's jaw tightened as if every muscle in his body was locked in place. The seconds dragged heavy between them, the air thick enough to choke on. Naomi could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, her eyes fixed on the gun resting against her temple. Simone's breath was steady, her finger grazing the trigger like she had all the time in the world. Well, she pressed. Kendrick's voice finally broke through the tension, low and flat. I'm not leaving her. Simone blinked slowly, her lips parting into a cold smile. Then you're both already dead. The first shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Naomi gasped as the searing pain tore through her shoulder, her body jerking back against the chair. Kendrick lunged toward Simone, knocking her arm aside, the gun clattering to the floor. They scrambled, the chair toppling, Naomi sliding to the ground as blood warmed the side of her blouse. Simone's hands were quick, desperate, shoving Kendrick back, reaching for the weapon. He grabbed her wrist, but she twisted, her eyes wild now, teeth gritted with years of fury. The second shot exploded between them, hitting Kendrick square in the chest. His breath caught, the shock on his face almost childlike as he stumbled backward into the table. Naomi screamed his name, dragging herself toward him, but Simone stepped forward, firing again, the bullet striking his head. The spray hit the wall, the sound of his body hitting the ground drowning out the rain outside. Naomi's sobs echoed in the empty suite, but Simone wasn't finished. She looked down at her, tilting her head like she was studying an insect. You took my future, she whispered. Naomi barely had time to process the words before Simone leveled the gun at her once more. The final shot silenced the room. Naomi's body went limp, her eyes still open, staring at nothing. Simone stood there for a moment, chest rising and falling, the storm outside now just a distant hum against the glass. She wiped the gun with a rag from her coat pocket, slid it into her bag, and walked out of the stadium as if she'd just finished a meeting. Hours later, it was a janitor who found them. His flashlight beam swept across the toppled chairs, the blood pooling thick on the floor, and froze on their bodies. The call to 911 sent waves of police, medics, and crime scene techs swarming the place, the flashing lights painting the wet pavement red and blue. News crews arrived before the bodies were even removed, anchors speaking into cameras with voices that carried both shock and hunger. By morning, every headline in the country screamed about the stadium murders. It took 3 weeks for detectives to connect the dots, tracking Simone across state lines. She was caught in Texas during a routine traffic stop, a fake ID in her purse and the murder weapon hidden in the trunk. The trial was a media circus. Prosecutors painted her as a cold, calculated killer who executed 2 people without mercy. The defense called her a woman betrayed, abandoned, and pushed to the edge. The jury took less than 2 days to convict. Life without parole. When the verdict was read, Simone didn't flinch. She just stared straight ahead, her face empty, as if she'd left whatever humanity she had left back in that stadium suite the night she pulled the trigger. And that's where it ends. 2 lives cut short, 1 life locked away forever, and a chain of choices that started years before the first shot was ever fired. So now we want to hear from you. Was this pure cold-blooded murder, Or was Simone's rage the result of promises broken and a past that never let go? Drop your thoughts in the comments, tell us what you think should have happened, and don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. And if you want more true stories that go behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.